Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tangmen based on novel. So let's start. Elder Wang said mockingly from one side, "What? You're thinking there's nothing much you can teach him, right? This youngster's foundations are near our own standards. Besides some top-tier formation arrays, concepts, and principles, we are only better than him in cultivation rank. I think his abilities are close to that of a Class 7 Soul Engineer. Perhaps his cultivation hasn't reached that level yet, but his abilities are definitely there." Yi Yulin nodded softly and agreed, "Yes. If he's as young as he looks, us seniors should feel guilty. Even though he's crippled, I favor him a lot. Who knows? Maybe he will create miracles in our soul engineering world in the future." Elder Wang heaved a faint sigh and said, "Don't give him so much credit yet. The world never lacks for talents and prodigies, but those that truly make it in life, and perhaps eventually become a legend of their era, are few and far between. It depends on his direction in the future. Right now, I want to see how far he can take his human-shaped soul tool with just 18 formation arrays. Have you realized that not a single one of the 9 formations arrays that he has created are weaponized? According to the tournament's rules, every person is only allowed to have one soul tool. He'll be going against the rules if he attaches external weapons. Yes, let's wait and see. If he's so talented, then he shouldn't be clueless about the rules. I don't think we can guess what he's doing exactly before he finishes his soul tool." The 10th, the 11th, the 12th. Huo Yuhao continued to complete formation arrays, one after another. The 5th hour was about to end, and someone had already finished their soul tool at this point. The first contestant to complete their soul tool was Huang Jing, who was representing the Duskwater Alliance with Huo Yuhao and Hikaitu. Huang Jing's soul tool was very characteristic of him. It was an enormous mechanical arm, and it was 120 centimeters long, with 3 sharp claws in front. The entire mechanical arm would be attached to his own arm, and it looked eerily shiny and reflective. What this soul tool did would only be revealed in the subsequent rounds. Soul tools that could be used for tournaments wouldn't be so simple or standard, and nobody could tell what it did just from looking at it. Huang Jing didn't leave his position after completing his soul tool. Instead, he crossed his legs and just sat there. He seemed to enter meditation. His entire body looked very calm and orderly, and he didn't seem tense, hasty, or too slow. The third elder in the resting area beneath the competition stage nodded in satisfaction. "Compared to Huo Yuhao, who's really making people worry, my disciple is displaying abilities that truly outstanding soul engineers should." He was very interested in Huo Yuhao, but he still had a lot of faith in his disciple. Hikaitu was the second to complete his soul tool. The soul tool that he had created was both fearsome and ferocious. Hikaitu had crafted an enormous cannon. On the surface, this cannon didn't look like something that typical humans could use. Huo Yuhao used many rare metals, but his soul tool was not necessarily higher in overall volume than Hikaitu's cannon. Hikaitu's cannon was more than 3 meters long. The most frightening part of his cannon was the cannon's mouth. It was 2/3 of a meter in diameter. This cannon could pass for a thick house column if it were placed vertically. It seemed very appropriate, or supporting weight. The tournament provided many different kinds of rare metals, but there wasn't that much of any one type. Therefore, Hikaitu's enormous cannon seemed extremely gaudy and showy as the cannon flickered with all sorts of colors from many different metals. What a waste. If the 7 judges were to evaluate his enormous cannon, evaluating it as a complete waste couldn't be more appropriate. Hikaitu might not even be able to use this cannon himself, and even if he could, it was still a waste. This large cannon was a Class 7 soul tool, and the judges could see that it was a Class 7 rapid-fire cannon. Rapid-fire cannons were very useful among Class 7 soul tools, because they could fire both soul power cannon rounds and stationary soul cannon shells. They could fire all sorts of shells between Class 4 to Class 7. However, such rapid-fire cannons were set up on a base, and a carriage had to pull it along. A fortress was also required behind it before a soul engineer could operate it. Nobody had ever done it like he had. He had no base, only a cannon barrel. Were all the formation arrays inside the cannon barrel? Was he going to carry his cannon on his shoulder? Even if he could fire this cannon, it would not be agile at all. His rapid-fire cannon couldn't lock onto his targets, which meant that he would have to rely on his eyes for precision and accuracy. Everyone was working faster and faster as the round entered its final hour. Most contestants had entered their final assembly phase, and they conservatively planned to finish 15 minutes before the stipulated time was up. Only Huo Yuhao was different. He had 3 formation arrays left, and these formation arrays seemed exceptionally sophisticated. He would need more time to craft each one. The other contestants completed their soul tools one after another. There were 15 minutes left when the 8th contestant finished his soul tool, while Huo Yuhao was still working on his final formation array. This formation array was huge, almost as large as a person's head. Huo Yuhao was also using more than one kind of rare metal. A combined formation array. Yi Yulin lived up to his name as the chief judge, and was the first to understand what Huo Yuhao was doing. Combined formation arrays referred to combining several formation arrays to form a new and multifunctional formation array. This couldn't be achieved by simply connecting several formation arrays together. These formation arrays had to be made complementary, and was a technique that only top-tier soul engineers could use. It was no wonder he was taking so long for his last formation array. He was probably combining 3 different formation arrays. Did he have enough time? Yi Yulin looked up at the hourglass. There was a little bit left. 1 hour was a very short time when crafting soul tools. Elder Wang whispered, "Should we extend the time?" Yi Yulin shook his head and said, "Is it that important that he claims the championship? We will let him finish his product even if the hourglass runs out before he completes his soul tool. He can be number 1 in our hearts, and that's enough. Tell the contestants, who have already finished their soul tools, that they aren't allowed to make noise, and they can't disturb him. Otherwise, they will be punished." Elder Wang's mouth slanted as he said, "You're so biased." Yi Yulin grunted coldly and said, "I've always believed that protecting the weak is a virtue." Elder Wang laughed heartily and said, "What a virtue. All right, I'll go." The other 8 contestants quickly received notifications that they had to wait at their respective spots, and they weren't allowed to disturb Huo Yuhao even if time ran out. Huo Yuhao's forehead was dotted with beads of sweat. He knew that he was racing against time, while his entire heart and soul was in his production, and his spirit had been raised to the highest possible level. Huo Yuhao even felt that the immense spiritual power that he had concentrated in his current state was subtly affecting and changing his spiritual sea, to the point where his spiritual sea was undergoing some kind of sublimation. At this moment, the Ice Empress, the Sky Dream Iceworm, and the Snow Empress were all extremely quiet in his spiritual sea. They were afraid that making a single sound would disrupt or interrupt him. Huo Yuhao was lucky to be in his current state. He had separated his spirit today, and his spiritual avatar had spent a very long time outside his body. Most soul masters wouldn't even dare to attempt something like this, as typical soul engineers didn't have a million-year soul beast like the Sky Dream Iceworm inside their spiritual seas protecting their spiritual origin. One mistake could cause their spirits to shatter into pieces. However, Huo Yuhao's experiment had been successful. Furthermore, his spiritual avatar had returned in time at the crucial moment, and his spirit was reintegrated while his spiritual power fused back into his body. This gave Huo Yuhao a better understanding of his concrete material realm, and it was then that he had quickly entered the body and mind as one state, catalyzing his spiritual power to circulate at high speeds, and he even managed to consolidate some of his revelations from before. Everything had just seemed to come together. Much of Huo Yuhao's spiritual power had been upgraded by the full moon-piercing autumn dew that he had consumed. He had assimilated the medicinal herb, but he had never been able to completely control the spiritual power that this herb had refined and improved. In the end, his body was a lot weaker compared to his spiritual power. He wouldn't even have been able to store so much spiritual power if not for his Eye of Destiny. At this moment, his spiritual power was sublimating once more, and integrated a little more with his body. This integration process was equivalent to boosting how much the spiritual sea in his brain could take, and also improved his spiritual power's compatibility with his body. The better the compatibility, the lighter the burden on his body when he used spiritual power. Even though his physique hadn't improved, he could now unleash a lot more spiritual power. Initially, Huo Yuhao had only needed a singular formation array for his last one. However, he was still immersed in that state, and he gave himself a challenge while he was feeling inspired so that he could force himself to undergo this sublimation at an even higher level. Even though this meant that he might fail to craft his soul tool in time, this opportunity to sublimate his spiritual power was substantially more important than this tournament. Of course, Huo Yuhao definitely wouldn't admit that the fact that his spiritual power was so smooth and streamlined had something to do with him stealing countless precious materials. The Tang sect had rendezvoused with Shrek Academy's company not far from the western suburbs tournament arena. Zhong Lishuan reached the hotel at almost the same time as Xu Sanxia and the others. Zhong Lishuan was finally satisfied when she found out that Huo Yuhao had indeed made plans for Bei Bei, but she still followed the Tang sect's members as they swiftly escorted Bei Bei out of the city. Just as Elder Xian had said, Radiant City was now under martial law as throngs of soldiers swarmed into the city. Everyone knew that these armies couldn't do much against powerful soul engineers and soul masters, but having them around was better than nothing. At the very least, these soldiers could restrict their movements and breathing space. The journey out of the city wasn't overly perilous. They readily exploited Radiant City's lack of walls. Zhong Lishuan helped everyone out of the city, and they met up with Elder Xian and the others. Huo Yuhao had already informed everyone earlier on that there were many powerful evil soul masters at the tournament arena. Therefore, Elder Xian arranged for everyone to rest in a small forest several kilometers out. Elder Xian personally embarked on some reconnaissance duties, since it was hard for most people to discover him with his abilities. This kid is starting to look like an ultimate soldier, Elder Xian thought to himself approvingly, as he watched Huo Yuhao on the competition stage from afar, still hard at work. Huo Yuhao had made a great contribution this time, and Elder Xian could cancel Huo Yuhao's punishment from last time, when they returned to the academy. It's a pity that Dubuzi and the others are not reliable. Otherwise, we might have gained so much more if I had guided them here. Elder Xian's eyes flowed with hostility and murder as he continued to think. If he could have besieged and eliminated the 3 underground organizations, the Holy Ghost Church's people, and those soul-engineered judges, the impact to the Sun Moon Empire would probably have been comparable to assassinating Xu Qianran. But Elder Xian was aware that it was just a fantasy. There were 5 evil soul masters who were also titled Doluo there, along with several other Class 9 soul engineers. There were far too many exceptionally powerful individuals there, and Shrek Academy's people, who were currently here, wouldn't emerge unscathed even if they could defeat this group. Furthermore, a great battle like that needed time, while the Sun Moon Empire clearly knew that Elder Xian and the others were heading towards the western side. It was clear that the Sun Moon Empire was prepared. The Sun Moon divine needle hovering in the sky made someone even as powerful as Elder Xian feel very threatened. Fortunately, Huo Yuhao had informed them in time, and Wang Donga and the others told Shrek Academy's company that the Holy Ghost Church's vice-founder and several of its elders were there. Otherwise, Elder Xian would probably have led everyone into an ambush. They had been separated from the body sect at this moment, and if their enemies and their enemies' reinforcements managed to surround and entrap them, the Academy was certain to sustain heavy losses. Elder Xian weighed the pros and cons, and chose to hold back in the end. His goal right now was simple. He wanted to ensure that Huo Yuhao and He Kai-tu returned safely. Their operation would be considered completed once that happened. Afterwards, they would have to wait and see what pleasant surprises Huo Yuhao's green signal would bring them. The cannon barrels that had been protruding from the structures within the Sun Moon Empire's royal palace had all been retracted, while cleaning and repair works were being carried out in perfect order. Xu Qianran was still standing in the pile of rubble that was his study, while the Holy Ghost Church's founder and Jing Hongchen stood to either side of him. The evil soul masters had all disappeared, nobody knew where they had vanished to. The Dragon Emperor Doluo was likewise nowhere to be seen. A servant clad in golden warrior robes ran up to Jing Hongchen and whispered something in his ear. Jing Hongchen nodded and walked over to Xu Qianran. Your Highness, the northern, eastern, and southern sides have been placed on the highest alert, and the respective Class 9 stationary soul cannons have been properly established. They will be instantly struck by our strongest firepower if they dare to break through from one of those sides. According to our scouts' reports, they separated a while ago. The group that Shrek Academy was leading went over to the western side, while the body sect, the Heavenly Soul Empire, the Star Luo Empire, and the others entered a Viscount's mansion towards the east. They haven't done anything after entering the mansion. They seem to be hiding and waiting for an opportunity. Hiding. Xu Qianran frowned slightly as his eyes closed into slits. Get someone to monitor them as closely as possible. We have to force them to choose the western side, and I don't think they're just hiding. If they have separated from Shrek Academy's group, then they definitely won't break through from the western side. Imperial Tutor, can you send some people from your side over there? All right. The Holy Ghost Church's founder nodded and turned as he disappeared into the darkness. It didn't take long before he returned. I've sent some people over. Without Shrek Academy's people, They will have to pay a bloody price if they want to force their way out with the people I've sent and the Empire's Soul Engineer legions working together. Why didn't you let us unleash everything we had when they were here before this, Your Highness? If we fought with our full strength, and if you had also participated, we could probably have taken down more than half of their entire company. Xu Qianran's eyes changed a little as he smiled and said, "We are inside the Empire's capital, and we are also inside Radiant City's Imperial Palace. If we fight them with our full strength, we will make them pay a bloody price, certainly. But we will also sustain heavy losses ourselves. Furthermore, they have so many title Doluor, and if they disregard the unspoken rule and attack the city, the entire city will be laid to waste. How am I to explain it to my citizens if that happens? We have to deal them a heavy blow this time, while making sure that we avoid as many losses as we can on our side. It's not easy for you and your church to nurture youngsters and talents either, no." He knew very well why the Holy Ghost Church's founder suggested fighting here. The man didn't care about death and destruction, and the deaths of so many citizens was actually greatly beneficial for evil soul masters. Xu Qianran wanted the rest of the world to descend into chaos, but how could he let the Holy Ghost Church do something like that here? The truth was that Xu Qianran wasn't that afraid of Shrek Academy, and the body sect disregarding the title Doluor's unspoken rule of battle. Rather, he was more afraid that these evil soul masters would take this opportunity to stir up trouble, and that they would murder throngs of his citizens. The Holy Ghost Church's founder grunted coldly and said, "I can't let those little scoundrels from the Tang sect escape. I will turn every single one of them into zombies under my control." He hated the Tang sect's company to the core, as the deaths of several outstanding young soul masters had dealt a heavy blow to him. His heart ached for them. Xu Qianran answered, "Don't worry, Imperial Tutor. Shrek Academy's company went towards the western side, and that means they will be leaving from there. Furthermore, they will never give up the glory that they have held onto for so long. Shrek Academy is facing off against the Tang sect in tomorrow's finals, so they won't leave until the tournament ends. They have left the city for now, but they will probably return after a little while because they can't bear to leave those elite youngsters behind. I can guarantee that they will all remain if they continue towards the western side, and we can keep them here forever by paying a very small price." The Holy Ghost Church's founder tilted his head and said nothing more. Time was almost up. There wasn't much sand left in the hourglass, and even Yi Yulin was starting to feel a little nervous. Huo Yuhao's hands were still working, and it would appear that his final 3-in-1 formation was about to be finished. Could he make it on time? Huo Yuhao was the focus of every single person's attention, and countless people felt anxious for him. Those who were most concerned about the outcome of this tournament were naturally those who had wagered and placed their money on this round. Everyone's mouths and throats were dry at this point. Of course, not many people had placed their bets on Huo Yuhao, and many people were secretly jeering him. They didn't know that Huo Yuhao was crafting a human-shaped soul tool, but this thing looked so much like a person, and it seemed quite formidable no matter how they looked at it. Yi Yulin withdrew the soundproofing soul tool beside him as he lowered his voice and said, "The hourglass is almost finished. I will count down from 10 after the last grain of sand drops before this round will end." The only thing he could do was give Huo Yuhao a little more time, as much as he could. Huo Yuhao's hands stopped moving for a single moment when he heard Yi Yulin's voice, but he quickly resumed his work. His knife sliced through and created 3 impeccable curved arcs. Huo Yuhao's life guardian blade flickered continuously, as touching and enchanting as ever, while the formation array in front of him now shone with gentle light. It was complete. Yi Yulin, the other judges, and the other contestants' eyes were all wide open. Huo Yuhao's final formation array was finally finished at the most crucial moment. And it was at this time that the last grain of sand dropped from the hourglass. The countdown has begun. 10. Yi Yulin raised his voice, but also deliberately slowed his countdown. Huo Yuhao exhaled deeply after he completed his formation array. He nearly forgot that his legs weren't working, and he actually subconsciously attempted to stand up. His legs didn't support him, of course, and his body swayed as he almost fell to the ground. Yi Yulin felt his heart sink as he watched Huo Yuhao. Yes. He has continuously crafted so many formation arrays, and in addition to what he made before this, he must be exhausted and spent. He had no idea that Huo Yuhao wasn't acting right, because he was too concentrated. Huo Yuhao supported himself on the table to keep himself from falling. He hurriedly picked up 2 formation arrays and turned towards his human-shaped soul tool. 9. 8. 7. No matter how much Yi Yulin wanted to be biased towards Huo Yuhao, he couldn't make it too obvious on the surface. This tournament was important for the three underground organizations reshuffling. 6. 5. Huo Yuhao's movements were quick, and he used reality to prove to Yi Yulin that his human-shaped soul tool's design was proper and rational. Huo Yuhao installed 9 formation arrays within these few seconds, and he was working hard to fit the remaining 9 formation arrays. 4. 3. 2. 1. Time's up. Stop what you're doing, everyone. Yi Yulin had really tried his best, and even his last sentence was slightly more draggy than usual. Huo Yuhao didn't disappoint in the end, and he attached the final formation array into the human-shaped soul tool's chest as Yi Yulin uttered the last 3 words. Huo Yuhao planted his hands on the crafting desk in front of him as he stopped, and it was clear that he was panting a little. Huo Yuhao was tired, and he even felt a little fatigued despite his formidable spiritual power. He had given far too much compared to everyone else over the past 6 hours. He had split his spiritual avatar and journeyed into that underground warehouse. That endeavor had consumed his energy continuously. He had also channeled his heart and soul into crafting this soul tool, and had entered the body and mind as one state after his spiritual avatar had returned. Being in the body and mind as one realm was very beneficial to him while creating soul tools. It was also very beneficial for improving his cultivation. However, it greatly depleted his energy. At this point, Huo Yuhao's spiritual power had been greatly depleted. Even though he was in the concrete material realm, he was almost on the verge of caving in. However, he was rewarded for his sacrifice. He could sense improvement. After this was over, his spiritual power was bound to increase. Furthermore, he also felt his soul power increasing at this tense moment. It was as if he had overcome a barrier. It must have increased by another rank. It was very difficult for him to increase his soul power, given his current condition. As his blood couldn't circulate properly in his lower limbs, his soul power couldn't circulate properly in his body. He currently relied almost completely on absorbing the origin energy of ultimate ice to improve. Under such a circumstance, it was definitely a surprise to him that his cultivation had increased by 1 rank. An increase in his cultivation was very beneficial to him in terms of absorbing origin energy. However, all this couldn't stop him from feeling weak at this point. The only good thing was that he adjusted very quickly. He took deep breaths and circulated his soul power. At the same time, his spiritual chi also undulated. The undulations of spiritual power helped to clear his mind. He was finally finished. Yi Yulin heaved a sigh of relief. Although he could tell that Huo Yuhao's human-shaped soul tool wasn't equipped with any additional weapons, at least Huo Yuhao managed to finish his soul tool on time. It wouldn't be a problem for him to enter the next stage of the tournament. The technical test was next. With the abilities Huo Yuhao had demonstrated earlier, it wasn't going to be difficult for him to pass this test. As for how he would perform in the quarterfinals, it would depend on himself. Since he dared to create such a soul tool, he must have had a plan. Alright, all the soul tools have been finished, and the deadline is over. From now on, you can only use the soul tool that you've created. You are not allowed to borrow other soul tools to aid yourself, Yi Yulin informed the contestants. After seeing Huo Yuhao complete his soul tool at the last moment, there were those who were in awe, and those who found it a pity. Huo Yuhao didn't have the energy to bother with how they were feeling. He was focusing right now, and did his best to restore his spiritual power. Yi Yulin scanned his surroundings and said, "We'll check the soul tools now and verify that they are finished products. Those whose soul tools aren't complete will be directly eliminated." After he said this, the rest of the 6 judges around Yi Yulin twisted their lips. He was too biased. The rest of the competitors had rested for 15 minutes and restored their energy. Only Huo Yuhao seemed fatigued. There was no such segment in the original rules of the tournament. After all, if there was a problem with their soul tools, it would be obvious when they were used later on. Yi Yulin was obviously doing this to stall for time and offer Huo Yuhao more time to rest. The leaders of the 3 underground organizations were weirded out at this moment. However, Yi Yulin's demand wasn't too unreasonable. Furthermore, they weren't willing to offend the Star Sky Doluo. As they were helpless, they could only watch as Yi Yulin led the rest of the judges to check the soul tools that each competitor had created. It was very thorough. The soul engineers even had to pour in their own soul power to ensure that their soul tools were working. Yi Yulin led everyone over in front of Huo Yuhao and he said, "Tang Wu, is your soul tool complete?" Huo Yuhao was very sensitive. When Yi Yulin deliberately delayed the timing by counting down from 10 earlier, he could already sense that the man was helping him. At the start, he thought that the judge had been bribed by the Duskwater Alliance. However, he realized something was wrong when Yi Yulin suggested this segment. If the Duskwater Alliance had bribed him, they wouldn't make it so obvious. Furthermore, the look in his eyes was the same Yang Xiaozhe had when he discovered that Huo Yuhao had twin martial souls. Has he noticed my potential? However, Huo Yuhao verified his guess when he saw how the judge looked at the human-shaped soul tool beside him. "Yes, Chief Judge. I have completed it. My soul tool is working perfectly. It can be used," Huo Yuhao said respectfully. Even though he didn't think that he could mix with this Star Sky Doluo, he still had to appear respectful, since Yi Yulin was being nice to him. Yi Yulin was drawn to Huo Yuhao no matter what. Seeing that he was respectful and not impatient, he was even more satisfied. He nodded his head repeatedly. "Good, good. If I'm not wrong, you installed some mechanical parts into the human-shaped soul tool, am I right? They are also the main components. Do you think these mechanical parts can replace formation arrays? Can your human-shaped soul tool fight?" Although he shouldn't be asking that at this time, he couldn't help himself. Huo Yuhao said, "I reckon that the mechanical parts can replace the formation arrays to some extent. After all, formation arrays are more complicated to make, and the requirements for the rare metals used are also pretty high. In addition, formation arrays can be unstable, and aren't as stable as mechanical parts. As a result, I replaced the formation arrays with them. Not only are they easy to create, but they are also more reliable. Of course, the mechanical parts have to be very precisely installed. This is achievable through continuous testing." "Ah, that makes sense. Test this human-shaped soul tool for us to see." "Yes." Huo Yuhao acknowledged. Yi Yulin asked, "Do you need our help?" As he spoke, he pointed at Huo Yuhao's legs. Huo Yuhao smiled and shook his head. He lifted his hand and pressed the human-shaped soul tool a few times. Suddenly, the chest of the soul tool opened to either side. The same thing happened to its legs. The entire outer shell opened up, revealing the insides of the soul tool. Yi Yulin discovered that this soul tool was assembled very precisely as he observed it close up. The overall layout of the soul tool was also very reasonable. The end product after the mechanical components were assembled was very level. It wouldn't be painful for one to enter and stay within the soul tool. The space available was also bigger than he had expected. Huo Yuhao said, "As I created this soul tool in a rush, I didn't add cushioning material such as leather. Otherwise, it would be even more comfortable." As he spoke, he leaned on the forging table in front of him with his hands. As he moved his waist, he shifted his legs into the leg spaces in the soul tool. After that, he shifted the rest of his body into the soul tool. With the support stand that he had installed earlier, he was held in place inside the soul tool even though he couldn't move his legs. A clanging sound resonated. First, the legs of the soul tool closed and buckled Huo Yuhao's legs in tight. After that, the entire outer shell closed, and he was completely covered inside the soul tool. This human-shaped soul tool was bright silver in color, since the metal that was mainly used to create this outer shell was silver. For some of the joints, the color was different. Overall, the soul tool couldn't be considered extremely pleasing to the eye, but it was acceptable. As Huo Yuhao slowly released some of his soul power, the eyes of the soul tool lit up. They were formed using 2 layers of thin metal that looked like crystals. A dim golden glow came from each eye. The metal that was used there was called crystal steel, which was very tough. The greatest trait that it had was that it was as transparent as crystal. It was extremely suitable for creating the eyes of a human-shaped soul tool. Huo Yuhao's spirit eyes shone, and he unleashed his spiritual power at the same time. His forehead contacted a formation array in front of him. Through this formation array, he transmitted his soul power to the rest of the 17 formation arrays around his body. The transmission of his soul power was completed through the formation on his belly. This formation array was also the largest and last formation array he had created. A layer of gentle white light was released from the human-shaped soul tool. As Huo Yuhao controlled it with his mind, the human-shaped soul tool walked forward. At the same time, it lifted its arms and seemed to be flexing its muscles. Clang! It was successful. Yi Yulin's eyes were filled with astonishment and surprise. While he was a Class 9 soul engineer, he couldn't believe that Huo Yuhao had created such a human-shaped soul tool. Human-shaped soul tools were often a barrier for soul engineers. The greatest problem with them was that they were very hard to control. The illustrious virtue Huo had once suggested huge human-shaped soul tools had to be controlled through spiritual power. The problem regarding soul power could be settled using milk bottles. They also started to install sealed milk bottles. However, immense spiritual power was needed to guide and control a human-shaped soul tool. In addition, it was quite difficult to control such a soul tool. The formation array that Huo Yuhao contacted with his forehead didn't come from his own research. It came from the latest technology invented by the illustrious virtue Huo, known as a spiritual guide. It was jointly invented by 3 soul engineers. Xian Ziwen was one of them. After looking at Huo Yuhao's plans for a human-shaped soul tool, Xian Ziwen had suggested installing this first. Using one's spiritual power to control a human-shaped soul tool would achieve the best effect. This video will end here.